Joshua chapter 5, more than a minute. Hopefully you have already seen our short, The Bible in a Minute, on Joshua chapter 5. This video is here to explain more about specifically Joshua chapter 5. In fact, not even the whole chapter. There's lots of good details in the early verses, but right now I want to look at just verses 13 to 15. If the fall of Jericho is the most famous part of the book of Joshua, I think this section of chapter 5 is a good contender for the second most famous. Joshua has a strange encounter, an encounter with a stranger. Well, here, before I get any further, why don't I go ahead and read the text out for you. So this is Joshua chapter 5, beginning with verse 13. Now when Joshua was near Jericho, he looked up and saw a man standing in front of him with a drawn sword in his hand. Joshua approached him and asked, "Are you for us or for our enemies?" "Neither," he replied. "I have now come as commander of the Lord's army." Then Joshua fell face down in reverence and asked him, "What does my Lord have to say to his servant?" The commander of the Lord's army replied, "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy." And Joshua did so. So far the text. So who is it? Who did Joshua encounter outside of the city of Jericho? Well, to be fair, we don't actually know. We're given hints in the text, but the Bible never outright says who this is. We know his job, of course. He's the commander of the Lord's armies, the commander of Yahweh's armies, if we're going to use the Hebrew phrase there. It's the commander of the armies of the Lord. So who is it? Well, we really have two major potential options. The first is that this is an angel who is the commander of the Lord's army. The second option is that this is the Lord himself. For God elsewhere describes himself as the Lord Sabaoth, which, while it sounds like Sabbath, is a different word in Hebrew altogether. It's a word that means hosts, armies. God is the God of armies. So which is it? Is this a commander of the Lord's army as an angel? Maybe Michael, perhaps. Or is this God himself? Well, as I said, we do have a few hints in this text, and there are two that stand out particularly. The first is this, that when Joshua is introduced to this individual, he, quote, fell face down in reverence. Now this is significant. The reason this is significant is because of the response he gets. Now, it is not uncommon for people to fall down on the floor in the presence of an angel. Happens to Mary, happens to Isaiah, happens to John in the book of Revelation. No, angels are an impactful sort of presence, and they usually knock people over. Occasionally, even, people begin to worship the angel, fall down in reverence, kind of as is described here. And yet, every time a human falls down in reverence towards an angel, we're looking at John in the book of Revelation, he does it twice. The angel always responds by telling them to stop. You see, angels are not like us. Angels are not prideful. They also don't have a problem with the first commandment. They know who God is, and they know who they are. They know who actually deserves worship, and they know it's not them. And so in the book of Revelation, for example, when John falls down to worship the angel yells at him, tells him to stop what he is doing, for only God is worthy of praise. The commander of the Lord's army in today's text does not do that. Does not tell Joshua to stop. Doesn't tell him to get up. Doesn't tell him to cease this act of worship. That's hint number one as to who this might be. Number two is the description, how the commander of the Lord's army does respond to Joshua, the instructions that he gives him. He says this, "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy." My guess is this phraseology, this kind of sentence, this instruction is familiar to you. These are the same words thereabout, the same instruction for sure that's given to Moses when he's in front of the burning bush. Which would lead us to suspect that, well, perhaps the burning bush and the commander of the Lord's army are the same character, same individual, if you will. In fact, this is my personal position, that this commander of the Lord's army that encounters Joshua is not an angel, but rather is God himself, is Yahweh not in the flesh, but in person, appearing to Joshua. Now, of course, if this is God, if this is what we call a theophany, or an appearing of God to man, well, then that raises a second question. Of course, we are Trinitarian. We know God is three persons in one, all that good stuff. But it almost leads us to ask, well, which person of the Trinity might this be? I think a lot of people tend to go towards the Father as the character, or the person of the Trinity, perhaps more reverently put. Yet my suspicion is that this is not the Father. This is rather the second person of the Trinity. This is the Son of God, pre-incarnate, again, not in the flesh, appearing like he is, but not incarnate like he is in the New Testament. And this seems to fit. Again, the book of Revelation depicts the second person of the Trinity as the commander, the Lord of hosts, the person of the Trinity who does the fighting. Fighting, which of course is at its greatest on the cross, but warfare which takes place throughout the ministry of Christ. It seems that Christ is the one to whom the angel armies of the Lord answer. And so if that is the case, and it's my opinion that it is, that means that Joshua here is not only seeing a theophany, but a Christophany, an appearing of Christ before his incarnation. An appearing of Christ in the Old Testament, or perhaps more accurately spoken, an appearing of the second person of the Trinity, the Son of God, before his incarnation. The second person of the Trinity who has come to Joshua before this, the day of his first great battle in the Holy Land, to comfort him, to encourage him, to show him who is actually in control of everything here. So, what do you think? Do you think that this commander of the Lord's army is an angel? Do you think it's God? Do you think it's the Son, the Father? Maybe it's even the Holy Spirit. Maybe you think it's something else. Feel free to let me know. And of course, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. There's all sorts of ways in which you can do that.